All right. Good morning, everyone. Officially, welcome to Wednesday, which I'm told that it is. How are we doing this morning? Okay, a little cold, I know, but okay. Kwan, you okay? Yeah. Fazwa, how you feeling? Yeah. I see you've already gone to the toque.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's cold on the head, especially if you don't have a lot of hair up there. It's, I'll be pulling out. I'll be dusting off my toques in another week or two, I'm sure, and probably wear them until March or April. Yeah, we're doing okay. Pretty good. Okay. Aria's here. Good morning, Aria. There you are. Kayla's here. Good morning to you. And Aryan is here. Good morning to you as well. Let's jump in, okay? So yesterday we were talking a little bit about Mesopotamia. I had asked you to read this section of the textbook and answer some questions, which you did, of course. And some of the things, these were the questions. And so I just wanted to quickly review what we talked about before we go on. Today what we'll do is we'll review this from yesterday. I'll show you some pictures. We'll talk a little bit about written language in Mesopotamia. We'll talk just a little bit about religion. We'll come back to religion in more depth later. And then we will, I've got a bit of a video to show you, and I'm not sure how much of this video I want to show. I've never shown it before, but it's a documentary on Mesopotamia, and it's hard to find a good documentary on Mesopotamia because there are so many wingnuts out there that think that the Sumerians were visited by aliens, and they learned how to build pyramids from aliens. And so there's that, and then there's people who want to do documentaries on Mesopotamia heavily influenced by the Bible, right? So they're basically trying to prove that everything in the Bible is true, and so they're kind of looking at the archaeological record, trying to support the truth of the Bible, and that's really no good for us either. We want something that's actually scientific and historical in basis, that's not trying to prove that the Bible is true, and also not trying to suggest that aliens visited, because that's ludicrous as well. So I think I found one, and I'll show it to you. We'll kind of see how it goes. I think it's interesting, but at the very least, it'll tell us some things we don't know, but it'll also kind of give us a bit of a visual of this part of the world. And I think that's useful too, because like you can read about this stuff, but sometimes it's hard to picture in your head what was happening, right? Like what it looked like in, what it looked like in this part of the world and how people were living. And I think that's part of what we're doing in this course, is kind of imagining what life was like for people thousands of years ago. And I think you, maybe not you, but definitely I need some visuals to be able to kind of imagine what that was like, okay? And so the documentary will, at the very least, give us that. But I think it'll be interesting to see, but we'll kind of see, we'll see how it goes. It's the first time I've shown it in this class, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it's a good one. So yesterday, again, you were reading about, and you were telling me, and I'm telling you, that this is a part of the world that is pretty arid, right? So it's quite warm, it's quite dry. We said that in terms of natural resources, the Mesopotamians didn't have a lot, right? They had mud, and they had the river, but that's kind of it, right? And they had to trade for everything else they might have needed. So metal or wood or good building stone, all of that stuff had to come from somewhere else. But fortunately they had the river, right? Because the river could be used to transport goods up and down, right? And again, it's much easier to build a raft and float something down the river than it is to drag it over the land, right? So river is important for drinking, for agriculture, but also for transport, right? And for trade. Let's see. Yeah, clean water, agriculture, and trade and transport, right? So we also said that yesterday for agriculture to succeed here, canals and irrigation was important, right? It doesn't really rain that much in this part of the world. If you want to grow crops, you need to get them watered somehow, right? And the Mesopotamians were among the first to start to build irrigation ditches and canals in order to water their crops. And again, the documentary will do a decent job of kind of talking about this as well. We said, of course, that the need for cooperation, right, to build these canals and maintain them would have allowed for an increase in social complexity, right? The beginnings of a state. And again, in this part of the world, we'll start to see the very first little city-states. We'll see big buildings, big monumental buildings, big cities, administrations and bureaucracy, and all that stuff will start to form here for the first time ever. Okay, we've talked about that. Oh yeah, here's just a couple pictures. You'll see a little more in the documentary, but this is kind of, what this part of the world might look like. I don't know, I've forgotten if this is the Tigris or the Euphrates. It's one of the two. But you can kind of see, just by looking, I think the impression we get is kind of a warm, dry landscape, right? Things look a little bit dry, but you can see that, those fields have been irrigated in the back and they're nice and fresh and green, right? But really without them, we'd be looking at, a lot of kind of dry desert grasses probably, or arid grasses. Here's another one. Again, I don't remember which river this is. Again, it's kind of a modern town with a bridge, but you get the idea of what the landscape is kind of like. So again, the resources they had, mud and agriculture. The things they didn't have was basically everything else you need to build a civilization, right? So wood, metal, good building stone. But again, they were able to trade for it. Now, the other thing that we'll learn about a little bit later, or maybe the text mentioned, I can't remember, is that the Sumerian people, so the first culture to exist there, may have come from somewhere else. So we're not entirely sure where they came from. They speak a different kind of language than most people in that part of the world. Okay, and so we'll hear a little bit later that most of the people in that part of the world speak Semitic languages, and so Semitic languages are the same language family as ancient Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic. Those languages come from are Semitic languages, but the Sumerian language is different. And so we kind of think that they came from somewhere else, but we're not entirely sure from where at the moment. Okay? So they came to this area and started farming, started building cities. And as you can see here, by, within a few thousand years, we've got cities of 800,000 to 1 million people, which for the ancient world is massive, right? This is the New York, if you will, or the London or Paris or Rome or whatever, Hong Kong, if you will. This is the center of, this is the biggest city in the world at the time, right? Massive, bigger than anyone's ever seen before, with streets and alleyways and buildings and temples, all brand new, right? This is brand new kind of human development here. Again, we've got some very old cities in this part of the world. You'll hear some of their names. It's a pretty short name. Uruk, Lavash, Eridu, and Sumer is a city as well. But the oldest one is thought to be Uruk, and we'll hear about Uruk in a couple of other places. That kind of says what we've already talked about. What did you read about yesterday in terms of Sumerian cities? Did you learn anything about what they are like? Because I think that was question 4 that I asked you. What were Sumerian cities like? What were Sumerian cities like? If you don't remember, say I don't remember. Say that one more time.
They have like an organized structure, like hierarchy, like a bureaucracy.
Okay, so there's an organized social structure in these cities, right? And there's a bureaucracy. There's people working for the government, right? Doing paperwork and things like that. That's true. It's true. What else are these cities like? Oh yeah, they have ziggurats, right? They have these really big temples, usually at the center of the city, right? I've got pictures of those. All right, what else do we have? Okay, we learned that yesterday too, that they believe in more than one, they believe in multiple gods. What was the fancy word we used to describe that? Poly what? The first half is right. It's poly something. Polysporin? No, that's when you get a cut. Polyester, polyamorous. Polytheistic. Yeah. Polytheistic, right? So these people believe in multiple gods. If you only believe in one god, what kind of religion are we talking about? A monotheistic. Yeah. So these guys are polytheistic. They've got lots of gods and goddesses. What else do we know about these cities? Might that be it, or what are you thinking? It's a I guess this is a civilized state, right? Well, let's see. Let me see what I got here. Okay, so these cities kind of function as organized centers, right? So there's economic activity, right? There's people trading and buying and selling things that they need. There's political control here, right? There's some kind of king who's in charge. There's temple priests who are often pretty powerful people in society. There's people working for the government, keeping track of taxes and keeping track of everything the king says, right? Because in this period, laws are just what the king says, right? So there's bureaucrats keeping track of all that stuff. Again, there's lots of trade happening. There's big streets and stone buildings. Like Victoria mentioned, there's a big ziggurat in the center, right? A big temple. And I'll show you here, well, I guess I'll show you in a minute what they look like. These ziggurats here are big sort of temples that are mostly constructed from mud brick, okay? And so, again, we know that the Mesopotamians didn't have a lot of good building stone, and so they used the materials they had. They created bricks out of mud, cooked them or fired them, and then kind of glued them together. They also built cities with walls around them, right? Because I think the text mentioned this yesterday, but these little city-states in Mesopotamia were always fighting with each other, right? Trying to take another one over, and sometimes they did. And so you would need defensive walls, right? Because you don't want the king of that other city-state to come and take over yours, right? So massive, massive walls go up around these cities too. And you can see here that Uruk had 6 miles of wall, right? And again, we're not talking about short walls. We're talking about walls that are, 20 feet high and 10 feet thick, right? Big, big, heavy walls. Yeah, okay, so here we go. Again, this is an artist's kind of rendition of what the city might have looked like. We don't know for sure. You'll see that in the documentary and in some of the pictures I have, these cities didn't really last the test of time. Stone is really good for preserving, mud brick a little less so, and so they haven't aged well. But here's kind of what you would be looking at, right? And I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty amazing. Would you say? For 5,000 years ago? Unbelievable, right? This massive city with walls and streets and buildings and temples, and incredible, right? And about 6,000 years ago or so, this is the only place on Earth that looks like this, right? Everyone else is still hunting and gathering, or maybe living in small villages. These guys have built, as I say, the New York of this period, right? Massive, big city. People bustling all over, dogs, horse carts, all kinds of things, right? This is the big city, and the first one of them ever. Yeah, as you can see, some of these have not aged well. This ziggurat is kind of heavily degraded and kind of reclaimed by the desert. But there's some that actually are in better shape than this, and you'll see those later. Ziggurats, of course, are these big artificially built mounds or temples, right? They're the home of the god, as we'll see, and they're the kind of temple that most people don't get to enter, right? So I don't know about your religious backgrounds here. Mine is I have a Christian background, and I'm kind of used to the type of religious building that you go into, right? So you go to church every Sunday or whenever you want, and you go into God's house, right? And everyone sits down and you have the service in there. But these kind of temples are not that kind, right? These are the kind of temples that are the home of the god, and regular people don't go in, right? The only people that go in are the priests who know how to do the proper prayers and proper rituals to honor the gods. So it's pretty interesting to see that these people have built these gigantic structures, but they're not for people to go in, right? Or very few people are allowed to go in. So they're not really for public worship. They are a sacred area. Right? Let's see, what does Herodotus say? Okay. Oh yeah. So there may have been a shrine at the top of these ziggurats to the god. A Greek, really the first historian ever, Herodotus, mentions it in one of his books. None of them have ever been found, but he says they were there. Yeah, so here's one that's a little bit better preserved. It might have even been partially rebuilt by archaeologists, so you can get an idea of what this kind of thing would have looked like. And here you can see kind of an artist's view, and they all kind of look similar. They're kind of they have layers, right? They have kind of tiers. That's a little easier to build engineering-wise. When we get to Egypt, we'll see pyramids that have kind of nice smooth sides. Those are much more difficult to build. This is a slightly easier feat of engineering, but still super complicated, and for the time, incredible, right? So you can see a steep staircase up the front, right? You can see various levels to it. And then at the top, you've got, kind of the home of the god, right? That's where the god lives up there. Oh yeah, okay. So, quick thing for you to read from the textbook, 3 pages. It'll talk about Sumerian social structure. It'll talk about cuneiform, which is important. And then the kinds of things we've learned from Sumerian writings, okay? So just 3 quick questions for you and a short bit of the text to read. I'll let you read it. I'll give you, I'm going to say 12 minutes because I often go for 12, longer than 10, shorter than 15. And when we're done that, we'll talk about these, and then I'll show you some documentary footage, okay? Yeah. Okay. Oh, no, easier. Online. Morning, Shota. less than a minute, okay, and then we'll talk. Okay. All right. So, just a short section here, but tells us some pretty interesting information, I think. What's society like? What's Sumerian society like here? What kind of people do we have in it? So we have kings, we have priests, lots of farmers, right? With who? Yep. Yep. What else? Who? Yeah, okay. So yeah, we have slaves, right? So we kind of see the breadth of society here, right? We've got kings at the top, but it goes all the way to slaves, right? People who are kind of owned as if they were, well, they're owned like property, right? We have priests, we have slaves, we have, who else do we have? Soldiers. Who? Local rulers? Okay, yeah, local rulers. Sometimes we might call these government officials. Sometimes they get called magistrates. It depends kind of who's talking about it. But yeah, we have the king, but then we have also lower level government officials, right? Who else do we have? Who people? Other. Okay. Who else do we have? Scribes? Yeah, scribes, people who know how to read and write, right? Because what's the literacy rate in Canada? 99% almost? The literacy rate in the Sumerian city-states is probably like 8%, right? Most people don't know how to read and write. Reading and writing is a special skill, right? So there's lots of scribes around, and their job is to read what's been written and write more things down, right? And they're specially trained to do this. Who else? Is there anyone else? Who? Administrators, yeah. Other members of the government. Tax collectors are probably administrators as well. So we have kind of a really complex society here, right? There's rulers and priests and scribes and slaves and craftspeople and soldiers and doctors and all kinds of different people, right? There's concubines and prostitutes, I'm sure, all kinds of different people in this society with different jobs, right? So think how different that is from, remember we saw the video with the Hadza, right? The Hadza hunter-gatherers living kind of a very simple existence. Everyone's a hunter-gatherer. There's not much status distinction. And then here we have a social hierarchy that's very complicated with people having all kinds of different jobs and different skill sets, right? So there's been quite an increase of complexity in Mesopotamia really over just a few thousand years this has developed, right? What's cuneiform? Yeah, so this is basically the world's first writing system, okay? And so in cuneiform, these Sumerians figure out a way to encode their verbal language, right? It doesn't say it in the text, but the Sumerian writing, the cuneiform writing, is a phonetic script. Do you know what the word phonetic means? You want to take a guess? Yeah. It's a script that encodes sounds, right? So English is like that as well, right? Because we have all of these different symbols and they all make a certain sound, right? And so when you put them together, when you put them together and you read them, your mouth makes a bunch of sounds, right? And then based on the sounds that come out of your mouth, you know what the word is, right? Of course, not all languages work like that. Any Mandarin speakers here? Yeah, so Mandarin doesn't work like that, does it? What's that?
Every word is a drawing of picture.
Yeah. So those are ideograms, right? So so in Mandarin, every character has its own.
There's no character.
What's that?
No character in Mandarin. It's all like words.
Yeah. So every symbol is a word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of a different idea, right? What's that?
Like for English, you can form it and you can guess how to pronounce it.
Right.
But for Mandarin, it's only remember.
Yeah. So in Mandarin, you've got every symbol is a word, and you look at it and you kind of have to know how to say it, right? That's how that works. But with a phonetic language, it's all sound based, right? And so as long as you know the sounds, you can kind of sound out the word, except in English where nothing is spelled the way it sounds and it's a disaster. But ideally, you would be able to sound it out, right? So there's kind of different types of written script. The nice thing about a phonetic language like Cuneiform is that you can use it for other things. And in fact, it does get used for other things later. So the Acadians, for instance, who come later, the Acadians speak a totally different language, but they borrow the Sumerian script, right? And they write their own language in their script because they can do it, right? And it's the same thing with English, right? We can write Italian or French or German. We can write all those in the same script, right? Because it's all sound-based. But of course, with Mandarin, with the character system, you can't quite do that, right? It's a different way of writing. But anyway, so why is this so important, this cuneiform? Yeah, we have access to all kinds of information that we would never have access to any other way, right? And they mentioned some of it. We learn a little bit about their marriage customs, right? And their laws and their religion and their beliefs, right? And their law code, what's right and wrong, right? We can learn all of these things that they think and believe when they write them down. But if they don't write them down, we don't have access to any of that, right? And we're just guessing. So, clearly written script was important to the Sumerians, but it's super important for us, right? Because now we have a window into their brains, right? We have a window into what they were thinking and feeling and believing and what things they thought were good and bad and how they felt about the world, right? And you can never get that from just digging stuff out of the ground, right? You need to be able to read it. The other thing that's important that the text didn't mention is that what did they write in? What did they write on? Clay, yeah. That's important too because clay, especially if it gets fired, if it gets cooked, preserves really, really well, right? If you write on paper kind of eventually just decomposes, right? It turns to, it gets brittle and it crumbles and then it's gone, right? But clay will last for thousands of years, right? It is, if you fire it properly, it is basically indestructible, right? And this stuff there's clay tablets that are just as they were thousands of years ago, and we can read them just as clearly as the Sumerians could, right? So not only the fact that they wrote it down, but they wrote it down on something that is very durable, right? Something that preserves well. That's important for us. The last thing I'll say about cuneiform that's also interesting, which the textbook doesn't mention, is it's kind of interesting how the thing that they were writing on kind of shaped their writing style, right? Because they weren't writing on paper, they were writing on clay, right? So they've created a script that you can do by kind of sticking a piece of wood into the clay, right? If you tried to write on clay, how do you think that would work? Not very well, right? You would get caught in the clay, and there'd be all these little bits coming out, and it would suck, right? It wouldn't work. And so the way that their language looks, and you can see a picture of it in the text there, the way that it looks is influenced by what they chose to write on in the first place, right? And if they started writing on paper, had they had it, their written script would look totally different, right? But because they were writing in clay, they created a system that worked in clay, right? That you could write on, that you could write your meaning cleanly and easily that way. Very interesting. Okay, and I think we've kind of covered, or maybe I answered question 3. Sometimes I do that. I get excited and I jump ahead. But what kind of things did we learn from their, or do we learn from their writing? What do we know from their writing? Oh, right. Yeah, parts of their religious life, right? Chants and prayers. Those are super important, right? Because what do people normally pray for? They pray up there, but what do they what do people normally pray for? I'm sorry. I screwed up. Please don't punish me. Right? So sometimes we apologize, right? I'm sorry I did that thing or said that thing. What else do we pray for? Things that we appreciate or that we want, right? Dear God, please give me this thing, right? Often that's what it is, right? And sometimes it's a, thing. Sometimes it's health, right? Sometimes it's something that we want to happen. People pray for what they want, right? So prayers are super important because how do we know what these people value and what they desire? It's what they ask the gods for, right? Oh God, please grant me this thing, right? Whatever it is. Prosperity, a good harvest, a new car, whatever it is. Whatever it is, we can tell what people want by what they pray for, right? What else do we learn from their writings? Poems, yeah. Good morning. What else? Yeah, we learn about marriage and divorce, right? What the rules are, how marriages work, right? That stuff would be totally invisible, right? In the archaeological record, you can't tell anything about marriage from stuff in the ground, right? It's the only way to learn about it, and we learn about it this way. Anything else? There was some other stuff. Measures? Oh, legends? Sure, right? Legends, myths, stories. Right at the end of that section, they talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh. We'll talk about that probably a little bit next week. What else? Sure, we have a king's list, right? We know who was in charge when, maybe even a little bit of what they did as king. Got that. What else do we have? Ooh, financial transactions, right? This sounds boring, right? Ancient tax records. But we can tell a lot about where the money goes, right? How much are taxes and where do they go and how are they spent, right? How people own property. They said some people own property in the city and in the countryside, right? But not everybody owns the same amount, right? Some people are rich, some people not so much, right? We've got some economic inequality in this city. It's interesting. Anything else we learn? Architectural plans? Is that what we said? Oh, okay. Yeah. We could see that as well, right? We could see drawings for how things are constructed, right? Ideas for how the cities are laid out, right? Yeah, this is a wealth of information, right? And you could never get that from just archaeology. You can't get that from things. You need people to write. And when they do, It opens up their world. Okay, that is good. Do you want to take a break? Me too. Take a break, come back, little bit about religion, and then I'll show you some film, okay? Coolio. We need to have a can-do attitude here. All right. Hello, people. We're back. So, right before the break, we were talking about the cuneiform written script, right? This is a phonetic script that the Sumerians created, a system of writing that was based on sounds, right? So you could sound out the words just like you can in English, right? Chen asked a question on the break, and he said, well, how did they actually figure out how to read this thing? And so I had a quick read. I'd have to do a little more research, but it seems that it was kind of a long process, but the Sumerian script, like I said, was used by other cultures later on. And so the Acadians used it, the Babylonians used it, and later on the Persian Empire used it as well. Not for all of its writing, but for some of its more formal, kingly sort of writing, they would use the older script. And so I think they were able to put together, because we had knowledge of Old Persian, they were able to use that to figure out what the symbols started to mean, and then they kind of worked their way backwards to figure it out. But it seems like it was a long process with a number of people involved in trying to figure out how the language worked and what symbols were sounds and how the syllables worked, and it was kind of a long process. But I think it was because those cultures continued to use that writing system, and then they preserved it as kind of a formal way to write the names of kings and things like that. But also what I very quickly read is that when the Phoenician alphabet was developed, it pretty much pushed aside the cuneiform alphabet. And so even in the ancient world, most people didn't know about cuneiform writing because it had disappeared centuries before. But again, we were fortunate that they preserved some of it in their more formal writing, and then we were able to work our way backwards. But it seems like it was quite a task to uncover or to figure out. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Let me just look at my slides here. Here's what I'm going to do. So, I'd like to watch this section of the documentary that I was mentioning earlier. And so it has to do with the Sumerians. And I've got some questions for you that I would like you to pay attention to while we're watching. And so I'm just going to put these into Microsoft Teams in the general channel. I'll just put them there as a little note. And again, those are the questions I'd like you to pay attention to and answer. For those of you who are online, you can watch the video on YouTube. It's also in Microsoft Teams under Files. For some reason, if you can't access YouTube, it's there as well. I'm just going to put the YouTube link into my Teams message too, because you might not be able to read it very easily from the live stream here. So just give me 1 second here. There we go. All right. So the link for that is in Microsoft Teams. And as you can see here, what I'd like to do is just watch one section, so from 6 minutes and 50 seconds to 30 minutes and 6 seconds, okay? So obviously in-person people, you don't have to worry about that. Online people, that's the section I want to watch. If you want to watch the first 6 minutes on your own time, that's fine. Doesn't really add much to the documentary, but if you want to watch it, it's okay. What you're going to see and hear in this documentary is some of the things that we've already talked about in terms of the transition to agriculture. You'll see some of the things we've already read about, and you'll see some new things, right? So there'll be kind of a mix, but I hope it will kind of start to gel together some of the things that we've done already while adding some new information for us. Sound okay? All right, let's give it a whirl. So online people, again, the information is in Microsoft Teams. In-person people, also in Microsoft Teams are these questions so that you can keep track of them and answer them, because sometimes it'll be hard to keep track of them if you're not doing that. but yeah, let's watch and see what we think, okay? So online people, will see you in, I guess, about 23 minutes, okay? Good luck, enjoy, and yeah, see you shortly. Okay. Okay. So, not bad, I think, in terms of a documentary. Again, the silt part was a little dry, I admit. I don't know. Okay, let's, what do we got? We got 10 minutes. Let's answer some questions here. I got to put this back on the screen for you guys. There we go. So, what is silt? What is silt, right from the beginning? Oh dear Lord. Are you going to make me turn this into like a homework thing where I have to like check your answers and make sure you did it? Because I will do that. I don't want to do that, but I will. Are you going to make me do that? No? Okay. Then help me out here. What is this silt stuff? Yeah, it's these little particles in the river, right? And what are the little particles made of? What's that? Not so much metal, but yeah, they're rocks, they're stone, they're minerals, right? So it's the parts of rocks that are kind of worn away, and they're transported down the river, right? They're very fine, they're smaller than a grain of sand, so it's easy for the river to kind of carry this stuff along. And what's eventually going to happen to all that stuff? What's going to happen to all that silt? It's gonna. Yeah, it's gonna be kind of dumped on that land between the rivers, right? When the rivers flood and then they go back down, it's gonna leave behind all of this silt. And what does that silt do to the soil that's there? Yeah, it makes it more fertile. Yeah, it makes it more fertile. It makes it better for growing crops. And again, if you get floods that happen yearly, right? Every year at the same time, we get the rainy season, and after that everything floods. You get this fresh stuff deposited on your field every year, right? Great stuff. Great for growing crops. So again, I think he spent a little bit too much time on silt, but still, the cinematography was beautiful. And so, number 2 here, I think the documentary does a good job of explaining that kind of slow transition to agriculture, right? As people, what do they kind of discover during this period? Yeah, they start to farm, right? They start to plant, and they start to realize that, oh, this is a good spot, right? This is a good spot to raise our crops, and we're going to maybe stay here, right? And farm here. And so yeah, the documentary, I think, does a good job of kind of explaining how that process kind of happens very slowly. I think the documentary is wrong in that, oh, the people looked at the seeds and realized that this happened. I think they got it. Hunter-gatherers are pretty smart. They know how plants grow, right? It's not rocket science, right? you pretty quickly understand how the process works. But the people here are kind of, if Jared Diamond is correct anyway, they're kind of forced to start planting seeds, right? They're forced to start growing their own food, and especially in a region like this, because what's the kind of environment like? Yeah, it's very dry, it's very warm. Does it look like there's a lot of natural plant life? No, right? And if there's not a lot of natural plant life, is there a lot of natural animal life? No, right? So this isn't a very kind of rich land in terms of food sources, right? The river is probably the best thing, right? There's probably fish and things like that in the river if you can avoid being eaten by crocodiles. But that's kind of what there is, right? So you can imagine people who are kind of getting pushed into this area have to start to grow their own food, right? Because there's just not a lot available, right? They can't really hunt and gather here, right? So you can kind of see that process happening. What kind of things do they start growing before long? What do we hear about? Wheat? What's that? Grapes? Garlic? Cucumbers? Something, what else? What's that? Oh yeah, the dates, right? The big palm trees give off dates, which are quite tasty. Anyone like dates? No? Nice and sweet? No? Not into them? What else do they mention? Leeks, millet, barley. I don't know if they mentioned it, but they're probably growing that too. What's up? Oh, pomegranates. Any pomegranate fans here? No pomegranate fans? Oh boy, okay. You guys would not last in ancient Sumeria, but that's okay. So lots of different things are being grown, right? So it's not just wheat. There's all kinds of vegetables and fruits and all kinds of things, right? There's 2 people living in this part of the world at the time. Who are they? They're who? Okay. Well, I've mentioned the first one quite a bit. Starts with an S. Sumerians, right? They're the first group, probably living in the south and maybe kind of coming from there too. And the people from the north are the... Starts with an A. Not quite. It's okay. So it's easier when you see it in print. So the Acadians or the Acadians are in the north, right? So there's kind of 2 groups of people here, but it seems like the Sumerians are going to be the ones that start to develop this complex civilization. We've got 3 questions left. We don't have time for it. I'm going to stop there. We'll come back to it on Friday, I guess. Don't forget, tomorrow we have our quiz, right? Oh yeah, we have a lockdown drill. We're going to hear a lockdown in a minute. You're all going to go into that corner and you're going to be nice and quiet, okay? Thanks for the reminder, Kenny. So, as I say, when it goes off, go in the corner, stay nice and quiet. You're not supposed to use your phones, but we can use your phones. This is not real. But in a real drill, no phones, right? We just sit quietly, no sound, pretend like we're not here. Cool? You can go now if you want, yeah, because the alarm's going to go off in like 10 seconds. Are you going out?
No, I go to the toilet.
Can you hold it?
Oh, yeah.
If you can hold it, just wait, because it'll complicate things otherwise. If it's an emergency, then no problem. But okay, online people, I'm going to let you go because we're going to have a lockdown drill. Quiz tomorrow. Look at Microsoft Teams just to confirm what's happening tomorrow, and then I'll see you then. Okay, so have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.